So they've got a pre-sale, which I think is pretty crazy, and I think goes against what we've heard about digital, at least depending on how you feel about where they're selling this. But basically, Caddx has announced, as we talked before, Walksnail and Caddx are now together again. They're selling the Walksnail Avatar VRX pre-sale with the 1S kit for $200. So this is the VRX we've been talking
Jeez.
about. This is this is basically all you would need to add onto a pair of goggles with HDMI in to get access to any Walksnail VTX. You get access to this digital system. And then
That's
they're also
crazy.
doing two other bundles. One is the micro kit, one is the nano kit. And those are the regular VTX that you're used to with the micro or nano camera. And those are $239, so $40 extra. And you get the bigger VTX as well. So they are definitely aggressively pushing the system.
How much are those VTXs normally? Like,
Well, I think it's 110. I think for the 1S, I believe.
mm-hmm.
So that 1S kit, like the camera and the
So
VTX.
you're getting the VRX for like $100.
Yes.
Jeez. I mean, that's a really interesting move. Like a whole lot of people who have a set of goggles. If you have a set of goggles with an HDMI input, Orca, HDO2, SkyZone, really many goggles, a whole lot of those people are going to go, well, I'll try it for $200. They're
So
just going to be
cheap,
like, yeah,
man.
let's give it a go.
And the other thing to remember is, as long as anybody's interested in Walksnail 2 months from now, I'm sure this VRX will be $200 by itself, and you'll be able to resell if you don't like it. You know what I mean?
That's a really good point, too.
This is such a value proposition. I think it's hard for people. I think it'll be hard for people who have goggles who can support this already, or people who are looking at buying HD0 goggles in the next month. I think both of those categories of people will be super interested in this pre-sale. And I don't know, it's super interesting that they're being this aggressive. I've talked to a lot of people about this, and I think a lot of people are on the consensus that this is close to cost for them. Who knows if it's really like selling at cost, under cost, over cost a little bit, but we've always heard digital is very expensive and it's hard to get margins on digital. And, now we're seeing basically $100, $120 VRX, depending on how you do all the divisions. So.
They're doing similar to HD0 in that they've got two patch antennas built in, which I am disappointed to hear because Walksnail's antennas have been crappy, just generally bad. I assume that internally you'll be able to just UFL and mod them, but that's too bad. People are asking, is the performance going to be the same as the standard, the goggles? And I would assume that it's the exact same hardware in the goggles, just in a different form factor.
So the thing to remember here is that unless you have HD0 goggles, no goggles you plug these into are going to be higher than 60 frames a second. So that's the difference you're going to see between buying a set of Walksnail goggles and a set of these goggles, right? So like if you plug them into your HDO2, that's 60 hertz goggle. If you plug them into HD0, that's a 90 hertz goggle, right?
Even if that's a good point. Even if the system can do 100 FPS, the latency of the display is part of the latency of the whole control loop, and you will be at that slightly higher, 35-ish milliseconds instead of the lower 25-ish milliseconds. Yeah. So some people will care about that. Frankly, the Walksnail goggles look very good. They have a nice OLED screen. It's large. It's bright. I mean, HDO2s look fine too. Orcas look fine, but there's something to be said. Those are nice goggles.
One other thing people were talking about was power output. They all appear to be listed the same. There's no obvious difference in any of the specs or settings that are listed so far that I've seen. People were talking about a 4-kilometer number that they were seeing, but if you go back and look on the goggle and the VTX information as well, they also say this 4-kilometer number. It sort of seems like something they've just built into the idea of the system. Is just and this is what DJI did as well. And I don't know if they still do, but they always used to say 4 kilometers for DJI, even when that was 13.3 with the update. So it seems it's just like a default number they share.
Yeah. The Walksnail system has been taken out to 30 kilometers, and it's believed it could go further with the right antennas and so forth. So this 4-kilometer thing is just, they don't want to, it's kind of nice to see a vendor not just ridiculously over marketing their product with lies. It goes way past 4 kilometers. So don't let that throw you off.
So I think one thing to consider here is, like I said, cost. We're talking about 100 to 120 for this. We've heard a lot that, we see the HD0 VRX is 220. We don't know what the margins are on that, but we assume they weren't great. So it'll be interesting. It would be interesting to know, because they're a vendor that's directly selling that VRX as well. They just set an MSRP for everybody.
That's a good point.
But that is the case. I don't know. it's interesting to see this pricing, and I don't know if they actually are paying, like, let's say 100 or 120 for the hardware. I think that bodes well for the future of the system, because that means there's a lot of margin to pull down, right?
That's a really interesting point. If we were to guess that they are not selling this at a loss, which we don't know,
Yeah,
but if they're selling this at close to zero margin, then this represents their floor. And that means that there is a lot of room. If that means there's like 45, 50% margin potentially built in that they could offer to vendors. Whereas we have seen HD0 struggle to bring their price down. We have seen stores complain about the lack of margin in HD0 products. Some stores actually decline to sell it or jack the price above MSRP, and we're like, what are you going to do? That's all that, been publicly hashed out. Carl has acknowledged it. Presumably the price, the cost of the HD0 stuff is higher. Although that's kind of weird. I guess they're using a proprietary ASIC that they developed, whereas Walksnail is buying from Artisan, maybe?
Right. Yeah, it depends on how all the numbers work out and stuff. Yeah, it's hard to know. I would think it may be at a loss, but I've definitely talked to a few people who think it's not. So it's hard to say. And I don't know that we'll ever really know, because we don't know what their deal is. So
Yeah, HD0 needs to drop prices, says GMI Visuals. I just don't think they can while still not losing money.
One way we'll know is when we see the open sourcing, right? When the goggles finally come out, when we see the chipsets released and we see what the actual cost is, right? I think
That's
that'll
a really
be
good point.
That'll give us some idea, right? We can sort of crowdsource and get an idea of what these things cost to produce. And then we'll see, like, is there margin there to make up if people aren't as greedy, or if there's some issue with the way their process works, or they had too many employees? Who knows? What we'll find out when all that comes through. People in chat are also asking about, like, what will the price be when the sale's over? And we don't know
Presumably
that yet.
It will go up.
I did ask Caddx, and they know who I am at this point, and they did not. They just said, we appreciate your suggestion, but we don't want to share MSRP right now. So my guess is 200 to 250.
Exactly.
I mean, that was what I would expect this to retail at in the first place. I was shocked when we saw the combo at 200, and again, I think that's super aggressive pricing. I expect this to be 200, 220, like right along with the HD0. To kind of duel with them and get another digital around the same price. But we don't know yet.
Jekle in the chat says, why would you assume the margins on the Walksnail module are higher? I'd guess that they aren't. I mean, we're guessing that the current price is not at a loss. Therefore, the current price represents essentially at least zero margin.
It's possible that they decided to cut this so low that they're just eating loss on every product. However, it's probably not super logical to do that, unless they couldn't cut it that hard. I mean, and then I think there's a whole different look at the system if they are doing that. Because then you start to consider, like, oh, this thing's going to die in 6 months to a year, it's over.
Well, right. So if they were we see it with video game consoles. They sell the video game console at a loss. They know they'll make it up in games. But the difference is that over the life of a video game console, you're going to buy a lot of games potentially. Yeah. Is that true? Like, would it make sense, do you think, to try to sell the VRX at a loss and make it up on video transmitters?
Can we do a poll in chat? Can we do, how many digital VTXs do you own?
Sure. Absolutely.
Maybe let's do like 1, 3, 5 plus or something.
Okay. How many digital VTX do you own? How about we do like 1 to 3? How about we can have 4 options, Blunty. That's all YouTube gives us.
Yeah, let's do like 1 to 2 maybe. 3 to 5.
3 to 5. 5 to 10, more than 10.
It would be like 6 to 10, and then 10 plus, right? Or 11 plus, or whatever.
11 plus. Okay, we're going to put a poll up. We'll see what you guys say. Okay. I bet that most people only have 2 or 3 video transmitters. My perspective on this is so skewed.
I'm always shocked. I'm always blown away. That's my problem. Is I have a bunch, and you have a bunch, but that makes
everybody
sense,
I know
right?
has a million quads, but that's because we all work in the business. A lot of people in the chat are saying 0. They're annoyed that we didn't give them the option to say 0. If you don't have any, then you're not really relevant.
It doesn't help
poll.
the data,
right? We only had 4 choices.
Yeah, it wasn't the goal of the poll.
So I'm not sure that it would for sure be a winning proposition to sell this as a loss leader and try to make it up on VTXs. But I don't know. Anyway, we got to say one more thing before we move to the next story, at least, and that is that cannot wait to see the Orca goggle, or I'm sorry, not the Orca goggles, the HD0 goggles. With this, think
Yes.
about that, Blunty. You have Walksnail in via the HDMI, you have HD0 built in, and you have one of the best analog systems.
Yeah.
The only thing you don't have is DJI, but at that, man.
Well, and it's the only goggle that'll do the Walksnail at 1080p, and it's the only goggle that'll do Walksnail if they can support it at 90 frames. They list 60 and 100 as the options, but I bet they'll patch in a 90 if it means that people can use it on the HD0, right?
That would make sense. Well, let's talk about resolution is the other thing. Somebody asked, is it going to work with, like, if I have an 800 by 600 set of, I don't know what old goggle would have HDMI, but do we think that they'll scale the interface down to lower resolution, or will you have to have a 1080 set of goggles?
I mean, I'm going to hope so. I mean, well, we know it's got a 1080 and a 720 option. So those are the two things that are listed. My assumption...
But that's the video.
Right.
I mean, if you think about the way the Walksnail goggles work, the interface is always at 1080. Right? The screens are at 1080, the interface is at 1080. If they're going to do a generic HDMI output, could they have...
I mean, down
Yeah,
at the
go ahead.
VRX section, they do list, they list three, if you keep going, that's camera. So there's a specific VRX section,
Let's see.
and that lists three numbers.
So it says the HDMI can do 1080 60, 720 100, and 720 60. So presumably, we know that those older goggles will take a 720p input and scale it. It may look like
Right.
crap, but they can take that 720p signal in. So
Yeah.
presumably, they would be usable with basically all those old HDMI goggles. Although, because the native resolution doesn't match, it will look bad.
What is HD0 output? 720 as well, right? And it seems to work with a
Good
decent
point.
number of goggles.
That's a really good
right?
point. Yeah. Okay, so basically all goggles with HDMI, more or less, will be able to work with this system. And you won't be getting the best experience because you won't have a 1080 screen. You won't have maybe OLED. But my God, this really opens up digital at a price point that I don't think we've seen before. Even HD0 doesn't come in at this price point.
Yeah.
Of course, this is promotional pricing, so we need to.
We got to see where that's going to be.
That's
We
really
got
cool.
200 votes. We got 200 votes on that poll.
Okay, let's check the poll.
I mean, that's pretty surprising to me.
Let's see. I'm amazed we have 200 viewers right now. How many digital VTX do you own? 3 to 5, 34%. 6 to 10, 27%. 1 to 2, 24%. And 11 plus, 13%. So that's actually out of order. It's a little frustrating.
So, I mean, if you consider that 75% of people have 3 or more digital VTXs, and 50% of people have, 45% of people have more than 5 VTXs, digital VTXs. I mean,
Yeah.
you could probably sell at cost at that point and make
You can
money,
certainly
right?
sell at cost.
Yeah.
It might make sense to sell at a loss, especially, and here's the thing nobody's talking about, except probably everybody's talking about it, especially because they need to build their user base. We know that the DJI O3 Air unit it exists. We know it exists. We don't know when it's going to come out. There are people who say they're testing it. There are people who say they have it. And we've seen the video quality that the Avata gives, which is pretty gosh dang impressive. And I assume that the O3 Air unit will have similar or identical performance. I think that's safe. I feel like if I'm Walksnail right now, I got the HD0 goggle coming. I got the O3 Air unit right around the corner, hopefully. And we got the Orca goggles and system at some point in the future. I'm going to try to build my user base as fast as I freaking can and get people locked in. Okay. Well, this is pretty freaking exciting. I got to say, it's pretty freaking exciting. What else? Do we have anything else here? We got a Facebook post. Do we need to look at this?
That was just their post on it. I don't know that it's super relevant, but they
got
do
a-
dates in there. So this only goes till December 1st. I guess we should mention that.
Yeah, okay. Shipping starts the 10th of December. My God, this is a real product. I
Yeah.
really was not 100% sure it was a real product. They're saying they're selling at a loss. We'll see. This is going to get a whole lot of people who never would have put the money out for DJI to try Walksnail. This is a baller move. Same with the 1S VTX, which I just reviewed. These are baller moves. I firmly believe that the Walksnail system is not yet as good as DJI. And yet these are the kind of things that you can do to get people to use your product, even when it's maybe not as good in some ways. Crazy. He leaves a €249 super chat and asks, is it the beginning of the end for Fat Shark? Again, going back to the Walksnail thing. And I do think that since there was a super chat about it, I think it's interesting to speculate about the implications of the Walksnail standalone VRX for Fat Shark. And my first thought when I heard about this was Fat Shark is going to be pissed. Because I presume that Fat Shark designed the goggles. I presume that Fat Shark gets a cut of every goggle sold, whether it's sold by Walksnail or sold by Fat Shark. And I presume they don't get a cut of this standalone thing that was developed in-house, because it's not a goggle. And I think a whole lot of people are going to buy this instead of buying Walksnail or Fat Shark goggles. Or are they? What do you think?
I think that's probably true. I mean, I think it'll depend on where this price comes in. But if you're in the future, if you're comparing buying Dominator goggles or Walksnail goggles that don't have an HDMI in and don't have a way to do analog versus HD0 goggles that can use a $200 Avatar VRX, I feel like you're probably just going to go with the HD0 option. Even if you don't buy the Avatar VRX right away, you can buy the HD0 goggles and then you buy in later. I feel like there's very few people who will, at a point where you can have all the options, will be interested in buying a inferior set of goggles because they can't interact with everything else. Like, how many pilots are only going to ever fly Walksnail? I feel like, maybe will grow at some point, but I feel like currently that's not a lot of pilots, right? Yeah. And most pilots want options. Most pilots want to be able to fly more than one thing. So.
There's an angle where you could say that the kind of person who is going to buy the standalone module is you could call them like a looky-loo. They're like, oh, I'm kind of curious about that. Yeah, I'll try it out. I got some Gorkas. I'll use it. Whereas the kind of person who is more dedicated to the system might buy the standalone goggles. But I do think you're right that the HD0 goggles really shake that up, because the HD0 goggles, well, obviously they don't exist yet, except as prototypes, so that grain of salt. But if they live up to their promise, they'll have 1080p screens, same as the Walksnail goggles. They will have OLED screens, 90 FPS, not quite 100 FPS, but 90 FPS. That's close. And I think you're going to get a similar or maybe better experience in some ways with the HD0 goggles than with the Walksnail goggles, except that you're going to spend more money. You're going to spend $600 for the goggles and another $200 for the module.
Sure, but now you'll be able to for
do everything.
But yeah, the difference is it's optional, and you can buy them when you want. And I feel like it just provides a lot better options for people. I mean, if you consider if they just had HDMI in on the Walksnail goggles, right? That would be a total different story, because then you could buy either one and you could decide to pick I could try HD0 later, or I could try Walksnail later, And that's the difficulty here, and there's no analog in, so you can't pick that later. I think that's the biggest issue is when you look at the value proposition of each of these. I think there's very few people who are spending $500, $600 and are not okay with spending a couple $100 more sometime down the line to get that better increase, right?
So I don't think there's. Right now, if you want to use Walksnail, your only option is to buy the Dominator goggles. So it's obviously going to be the case that Fat Shark's sales of goggles will go down somewhat due to this module. How much it'll be, it's hard to say. There's also people out there who will be like, no, I don't want no freaking module hanging off the front of my goggles. I'll just spend $600 on the right and just, use, those people exist too.
I would say the biggest hit is going to be the next month. The biggest hit is going to be in the next month as all these are getting slung out the door at a super cheap price. And that's where they're going to see very few goggle sales, I think, versus this, certainly more people aren't going to be, you're not going to get more sales. So
no, it's very, So if I'm Fat Shark, I have to be annoyed that they did this. Yeah. This has to be bad, at least a little bit bad for Fat Shark. Maybe in the short term, maybe in the long run, it builds the system and they get more sales at the end of the day.
Fat Shark doesn't sell VTXs.
But maybe some of those people will buy goggles, Blunty.
I think the whole problem here is they don't sell VTXs. If Fat Shark sold VTXs under a Fat Shark brand as well, just like they sold goggles, I think they would have a totally different world here, where there is a value proposition for them. It doesn't matter; they'll sell VTXs eventually, right? But in this world, I mean, they need to sell the goggle. Like their whole value here is selling the goggle. The question is, what are they really invested? How much are they losing? What are they banking on? I think those are more the questions I have here. Do they really care that much about these? Like in the whole long run of things, like Fat Shark might care, but is Fat Shark's part of Red Cat? How much do they care?
What is Fat Shark going? Because Fat Shark, if any good company won't take something like this and just go, "Oh, guys, I guess we're screwed." They'll be like, "Okay, how can we profit from this? How can we respond to this?" So for all we know, Fat Shark is working on their own VTXs. I don't know. For all we know, Fat Shark has something in their pocket to help capitalize on this. I don't know.
So now do we need to get into speculation territory?
Oh yes. Absolutely.
Did Rotor Riot know this was happening, and that's why they put the 30-day money-back guarantee on the goggles?
Oh, interesting. They wanted
they're doing
to
it
move
at the same time. Yeah, at the same time as this is happening, they early and until November 30th, which is the same time frame as this sale, they are doing a 30-day money-back guarantee on the goggles.
So they're hoping that people will buy the goggles because of the money back and skip the VRX.
It kind of seems like that's a convenient timing. Who knows if that's actually related, right?
I mean, a certain type of person might say that with the implication that it was a sleazy move. But honestly, the 30-day, if you're mad and you wish you bought the VRX, just send it back.
Just put it in a box. Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like Rotor Riot, it's pretty hard to make Rotor Riot the bad guy, although a lot of people will probably try to do that. Interesting.
Yeah.